start off the conversation, I know ESG has become a buzzword in Sri Lanka, and we have actually seen several initiatives increasing also around the country. But from your point of view, how would you assess the overall adoption if we take Sri Lanka as a whole?
Yeah, so sustainability is nothing new for Sri Lanka. It's been here for almost 15-20 years.
Yeah.
Over the years, initially it was based on initiatives. Organizations kind of thought that they should address sustainability based on maybe environmental or certain social initiatives, helping the community or helping the environment. The true ESG kind of frameworks and alignment to strategy took place probably in the last 10 years. This has basically aligned Sri Lanka with that global drive, as you may say. I think we are on the right track.
Nice.
Now, if you really understand what your impacts are and how you need to manage your stakeholder needs and their impact. So I think that's the kind of difference that one needs to understand. And when they do that, it definitely becomes an investment, a long-term strategy for the organization rather than short-term gains.
ESG in Sri Lanka has moved from being something that's nice to have into being something that's mandatory. We spoke about all of this and more with Charith Jayasundera. Stay tuned.
For 30 years, LMD has been the voice of business in Sri Lanka, capturing the pulse of the nation's corporate landscape through its iconic covers. Each cover tells a story, from the first edition in 1994 to the present day, narrating key moments, leaders and trends that have shaped Sri Lanka's business ecosystem. Over the years, LMD covers have featured thought leaders, business pioneers and game-changing innovations, reflecting the evolution of industries and the economy. As we celebrate 30 years, these covers represent more than just publications. They are a testament to LMD's legacy of excellence in business journalism and its unwavering commitment to being Sri Lanka's leading voice of business. LMD, Sri Lanka's voice of business, a legacy of 30 years.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation today is ESG, and I'm here with the Associate Director of Climate Change and Sustainability at KPMG Australia, Charith Jayasundera. Charith, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
To start off the conversation, I know ESG has become a buzzword in Sri Lanka, and we have actually seen several initiatives increasing also around the country. But from your point of view, how would you assess the overall adoption if we take Sri Lanka as a whole?
Yeah, so sustainability is nothing new for Sri Lanka. It's been here for almost 15-20 years.
Yeah.
The way it has been practiced has been slightly different. So over the years, initially it was based on initiatives where organizations kind of thought that they should address sustainability based on maybe environmental or certain social initiatives, helping the community or helping the environment. But the true ESG kind of frameworks and alignment to strategy took place probably in the last 10 years. And I've seen massive increase of adoption, as you mentioned, and alignment to strategy, which a few large and also some medium organizations, medium-scale or enterprises have seriously gone into. So this has basically aligned Sri Lanka with that global drive, as you may say it, and I think we are on the right track.
Nice.
Now.
That's very good to hear. You've mentioned the alignment with strategy, which I want to touch upon in a little bit. But beforehand, just to give our viewers a kind of overall, overall understanding, how do you think sustainability initiatives and sustainability alignment rather is impacting business dynamics if you take the economy?
Yeah, so of course, sustainability is always a long-term investment.
Yeah.
A lot of people see it as a cost. A lot of people see it as a nice to have. But sustainability always has been a strategic approach for an organizations. And if you really understand what your impacts are and how you need to manage your stakeholder needs and their impact, so the organization's impact to stakeholders, it always becomes a long-term investment. So I think that's the kind of difference that one needs to understand. And when they do that, it definitely becomes an investment, a long-term strategy for the organization rather than short-term gains.
Yeah. And looking at the business community in Sri Lanka, especially now that we're looking at more investments coming in and all of that, how serious is it that businesses should adopt sustainability? Also, because we have climate change, vulnerability on the other end of the spectrum.
Yes, so it's becoming very serious. It's becoming very serious for multiple reasons. One is that Europe and globally, the IFRS or the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, have now come out with a mandatory requirement to report on sustainability disclosures, very similar to your financial disclosures. But of course, this is at the moment limited to your emissions, so your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And there are plans in the future where other sustainability related topics will be brought into play as well.
Okay.
But so far, sustainability was never a mandatory requirement, but from 2025 onwards, it's going to be mandatory for certain organizations.
Certain organizations, depending on size, or
depending on whether they are public listed and the size, revenue, and the number of employees. So IFRS has allowed each jurisdiction to implement this based on what they deem as suitable. Australia does it in a particular way, which is done by AASB, which is Accounting Board for Australia, Australian Accounting Standards Board, and the Treasury. So the Treasury will determine the timelines on which organization at which scale will have to report, and also assurance of those reports will become mandatory as well. So this is the pivotal point, because when assurance becomes mandatory, you need to be very clear in terms of what your data is. You need to be transparent, and you have to have your processes in place.
Of course, it cannot be an ad hoc kind of thing.
It cannot be ad hoc. It cannot be something that you want to try and test. You need to follow the necessary processes, and you need to have sufficient integrity in data.
Charith, earlier you mentioned about the alignment of ESG into a company's strategy.
Yeah.
This might be like an unfair question, but can you list the main ingredients that are necessary for a company to do this?
Absolutely. So I think the main ingredient through my almost 20-year career that I've seen and needs to be in place is the top management leadership and buy-in of sustainability. Sustainability can never be a bottom-up approach. It has to be a top-down approach where the senior leadership, the board directors have complete buy-in of the particular strategy and the drive, and then drive it downwards through the hierarchy of the organization. So that's number one. Number two, it needs to address all your stakeholders, not just your financial stakeholders like your shareholders or any financial debt providers and equity holders. It has to understand all your stakeholders, understand all their issues and the impact you have towards them and them to you. So that's what we call double materiality. Any organization that practices double materiality, we have a very easy journey in implementing sustainability. That's basically my experience. So I think with that, then comes your ancillary things like your processes, a proper system to capture data, an internal process to ensure that your governance of your process and your data is in place. So for example, there has to be a multiple tier checks and balances throughout the year, and also capturing your information almost live today, because it's becoming live, and that's when it adds value to your organization. If not, you just wait for one entire year, 12 months, and if sustainability is only driven by a sustainability report or applying for some awards at the end of the year, that's not the right method to do.
Approach. It's very interesting that you didn't mention funds or resources in your main ingredients list.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a given that you need to have a significant allocation of capital and resources. You need to have a couple of sustainability champions, not necessarily just allocated for that function. It could be somebody who's, handling some other particular function or process, but also has the accountability towards the sustainability area. But most importantly, I would still come back to that leadership and also the interest of the leadership to understand how sustainability is performing, similarly to their financial performance.
It's time now to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about ESG.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
Welcome back to the show. We're in conversation with the Associate Director, Climate Change and Sustainability at KPMG Australia, Charith Jayasundera. Charith, you spoke of the necessary things that a company should have. We also say that, if you want to get something done, sometimes having mandatory requirements or must-dos also will help. How can Sri Lanka, or how does mandatory requirements across, different countries, like you mentioned in Australia, you have, an accounting body that kind of sets the standards. What's the picture looking like for Sri Lanka in terms of mandatory requirements?
Yes, so since 2024, there have been a suite of mandatory requirements that have come across globally. The two main ones are the ISSBs, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, which has come out with the IFRS S1 and S2. S1 is the general disclosure requirement, and S2 is the climate change based requirements, which I touched upon earlier. And then, so that's a global requirement for almost all listed organizations. How that's implemented based on scale and size will differ from one to another, but that's coming through. And more importantly, there is a slightly more complex European Union taxonomy called the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosure, which has lent towards ESRS. ESRS stands for European Sustainability Reporting Standards, and this requires an organization actually to disclose just more than your climate change. It aligns very closely to the GRI framework, which I think is well known amongst the sustainability practitioners because it's been around for almost 20 years or more. But it actually requires an organization to disclose on your environmental, social, and governance, or your triple bottom line impacts based on the double materiality, framework. So what happens is this becomes mandatory in Europe from FY25, and any organization that has business with these European firms will have to, in some way or another, start the process within their organizations, within their entity, within their value chain, because it's brought in through the value chain, and they will also have to start reporting on it to a certain extent, at least, at minimum, to their business partner in Europe. So that becomes quite an onerous requirement.
Challenge, but I think it's also a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing. And a lot of organizations I see in Sri Lanka who have been early adopters of the double materiality approach and GRI, and also have looked at sustainability as a holistic triple bottom line rather than only climate or only social are in good stead.
Good.
They should be able to easily adopt the CSRD and move ahead with those requirements.
It's very nice. Very nice to hear, and I'm sure the ripple effects will be manifold.
Absolutely.
We earlier spoke about like aligning ESG into a company strategy. Upon alignment, how should companies really make sure that those alignments and the strategy drives sustainable outcomes?
Yes, so I think that's a very good question. It comes back to that impact. What is the impact you want to create? So when you understand the impact that you have upon your stakeholders and the stakeholders have upon you, so the impact will allow you to understand your risks and opportunities.
Yes.
Or rather your sustainability risks and opportunities. So that is your starting point, which we call the materiality that we do on sustainability. And this is a very kind of cliche example that I provide to a lot of clients and people when I talk about sustainability is you need to understand your pain points based on your industry, based on the scale of your organization, and based on your impact. So, for example, if you are an IT-based organization, it's not as material to report on or to kind of monitor your water consumption as much as your energy consumption, because it's just logical. Similarly, if you are a financial institution, your environmental impact is going to be very minimal opposed to a manufacturing organization that's heavily dependent on water or emissions and so on. So based on that, an organization definitely needs to do that first step of understanding what is material to them. And there's a laundry list of material topics that, for example, frameworks like GRI provide an entity to understand what is most material and who your most material stakeholders are. And that's where the impact lies. So once you've identified those and once you have then built in the necessary processes and policies within the organization to address these issues, you've done half your work in terms of your impact. And then your annual report or your sustainability disclosure at the end of the year just simply becomes a document of commitment and achievement of this is what we have achieved, but this is what we commit to in the coming year. And that is a document of commitment, not just to your shareholders, but all your stakeholders going forward.
That's an interesting example. And how difficult is it for companies to, like, I mean, you mentioned impact, but the way you define impact and the way you measure impact, I think has to, like you said, depend on company to company.
Absolutely. There's no, one size fits all. It is dependent on many external parameters as well as the industry itself. So there are sector standard metrics that are being developed by various framework providers. So the ISSB has kind of planned to come out with a few sector standards. GRI already is publishing sector standards. If I'm not mistaken, they have already done 6 sector standards. I myself sit on the sector standard development committee for GRI's textile and apparel industry. And their target is to have 40 sector standards. So when these 40 sector standards come out, and whatever that already has been developed, it makes sense for an organization to, based on the sector, first address those sector standards before they go into the general topics.
I guess now, more than the early adopters, the companies who are starting the journey now, I think having an easier path, would you say?
I mean, yes and no, because now there are so many frameworks out there, it's becoming mandatory. So the lead time to get to where they should has shortened. Whereas when things were a bit more
Nice to have.
easier,
Easier, yes.
not much of pressure, and where things were more voluntary rather than mandatory,
Yeah.
Organizations had the kind of comfort of taking their time, trial in certain methods, and getting their house in order. But today it's a bit of a scramble to get your house in order, especially if you haven't looked into this seriously.
Can hit the ground running.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Charith. We've been in conversation with the Associate Director, Climate Change and Sustainability at KPMG Australia, Charith Jayasundera. Charith, thank you for a very insightful and interesting conversation and for all the information.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram and X. Thank you for watching and stay safe.